Hello everybody, welcome to my latest video. I am really pleased and chuffed to bits to have Dr. Timms with me today. We're going to be talking about bacteria and all things to do with the tank. So first of all, over to yourself, Dr. Timms. Maybe you can introduce yourself to the viewers. Some people will know and have used your products before, like myself at EcoBalance, and others be completely new to yourself and also Dr. Timms. So welcome.
Thanks, Paul, for inviting me onto your YouTube podcast. Appreciate it. So I'm Dr. Tim. I've been a hobbyist since I was 6 years old, and
Wow.
I also wanted to be a scientist, so I combined it. And I've had fish all my life. I was in the U.S. Peace Corps raising shrimp. Then I worked on a fish farm. I was head of research at Marineland Aquarium Products for almost 18 years. Which made the bio wheel and lots of other products, and then started Dr. Timms about 17 years ago, and even did my PhD on nitrifying bacteria.
Nice.
My back. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go on. I was going to ask you a question, but no, go on. You're in full flow.
Well, my background as a scientist is ecology, trying to understand how things flow, nutrients in, nutrients out, how everything works. And that's basically what an aquarium is. It's a little mini ecosystem, and you're putting food in, and you're trying to keep algae and cyano and dino at bay, and you want this beautiful aquarium. And that's what I'm trying to understand. And when I first started, bacteria were, whatever. If you knew Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter, that was it. Everything else is, let's just deal with fish and corals. But now people are starting to learn that bacteria are really the key to having a successful, stress-free aquarium. The microorganisms are what really maintain, rule or overrule the system, which is fun because nowadays you can do genomics, you can ask questions, you can get answers quickly without having to sit there and stare at a petri dish and hope something grows.
Absolutely. And I think for me, one of the reasons for asking you on to have a conversation was I started in the hobby 10 years ago. There was live rock. There was loads of bacteria that you put into your tank just by default, and no one really talks about it. And now if I look at the tank behind me, this is going for 18 months. And I started that off with dry rock and dry sands. And I have struggled. And when I've been looking at it, it's the lack of bacteria, maybe the way I've cycled and how I've taken that tank for its first 12 months. And it's been the most challenging tank I have had in my time. I've been surprised how challenging it is. And that's all on me. And it's for me building up my knowledge now around bacteria. I've got dinos at the moment, but how I'm treating that and just putting bacteria in and everything else to outcompete. And I'm sure we'll come on to that about competition that goes on within the tank. But before I kind of move on to the first question, what made you start Dr. Timms? Because, obviously going through your background and everything else, what made you start the company? So I'm really intrigued to understand what was that prompt?
Well, like I said, I was in the aquaculture business, raising food fish, and started working with Marineland Aquarium Products. And it's always tropical fish, marine fish has always been my passion. And they hired me, and I started the lab there. And we were doing some really nice work in publishing studies and developing products. And then when they were bought out and the new company shutting things down, I just liked what I was doing. And I thought, well, I still have stuff I want to do. And I just decided with my partner to start our own company, because it's fun. I don't go to work, I just do what I've always done as a kid. So
you just turned it into a business.
And turned it into a business. Sometimes stressful, most of the time enjoyable. Yes.
Yeah. I think anything you do, there's going to be that balance of stress, ups and downs, but as long as you enjoy it and it's kind of your passion, that makes it even better, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's just so much, I did a 3-part series for Coral Magazine about microorganisms and nitrifying bacteria, and there's been a lot of major discoveries over the last 25 years, so major that they're published in like this, Nature, the journal Nature, which is the premier
Wow.
journal in science. And all these studies they were all done in aquariums. So that, the little thing behind you has
Yeah.
groundbreaking top level science in it. And that's just a lot of fun in trying to understand, you know, now bacteria, or genomics, and all this stuff is top of mind. We don't know anything about what's
Mm.
going on, and it's just like, well, it's a simple box, but we still don't know. So it's a challenge. I like challenges.
Absolutely. When I was looking to do not some research, but trying to understand more around bacteria, there's lots of stuff about a lot of things about the aquariums. But in terms of bacteria and understanding it, I think it's probably a subject where there's one of the least amount of material out there, which kind of tells you where we are in the stage of the hobby understanding that and the influence and then the balance and everything else that comes with it, or the lack of balance through the lack of bacteria. So I think it's fascinating. And as you say, what we understand today may be very different in 5 years' time and 10 years' time, as it is with other things within the hobby, and I suppose in life, isn't it? As science progresses, where what we
Right.
did understand is
Science
very different.
builds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's, techniques, sampling techniques. When I started not that long ago, we were still running gels and radio excuse me, with radio labeled phosphorus on X-ray film. And I'm not that old. I'm not that ancient.
Brilliant.
And now you can take a sample, send it in, and get full genomic sequencing, and it's not that expensive. So things have really progressed where you can start asking questions. But you got to ask the right question, and then you got to design the experiments, which, that's where the science comes in,
And the
is
skill. Yeah.
asking the right question and the skill of how to design experiments and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with that in mind, I'd like to come on to the first question, if that's okay. And that's really about
Yeah.
starting a tank and how do you successfully, I suppose, start and cycle a tank. And when I think about it, I used to think about one thing: how do you do it so that when you put fish in, they survive and they thrive? And I think now it's a bit more than that, about how do you cycle it that the fish are happy and there's not surviving but thriving, but also how do you build up that foundation for the future? Because I now think of it as two steps. It's not just binary, that's about ammonia and actually nitrite and then nitrate, and then you say the cycle's completed and then you put your fish in, which is very much has been in my mind over the years, and it's only recently it changed. So with that in mind, how would you go about that, and what have you learned on how best to do that?
Right. So the issue is you're right. You need microorganisms because there's bacteria, there's archaea, there's a whole community of primary producers down there. And the fish and the corals are kind of they're heterotrophic organisms. They're looking for food. They're not primary consumers. And bacteria are just a part of that. And it used to be, okay, you add bacteria and they take care of the ammonia and the nitrite and you're cycled.
Yeah.
But that only gets the stage there because you need the second group, which are called the heterotrophic bacteria. And they're the ones that can keep the algae at bay. They're the ones that can keep the nitrates and phosphates in check. But they grow at a much different level, much faster than the nitrifiers. And so there's a balance you have to have because you don't want, say, cloudy water, because the heterotrophs, some people want to put a cut shrimp in there, or they want to add an organic substance, which the heterotrophs feed on that, and they will actually grow so fast they'll consume all the oxygen in the water, and that will kill everything. So there's patience and a balance, and most people are in a big hurry. They want to get the thing cycled fast, but fast isn't necessarily right. You need to bring the nitrifiers in check, but also the heterotrophs in check, And then you won't like get the diatom bloom. Everybody gets the diatom bloom in about 2.5, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's because there's a niche there, a gap. You don't have these heterotrophic bacteria in the right numbers yet, and so the diatoms take off. Nature's going to do something with the nutrients in the system, and
Okay.
that's why live rock was such a good thing, because live rock not only had bacteria, it had other microorganisms, it had algae, it had a big community, and you were putting it in your tank to get things started. Now, when you start off with dry rock, it's a blank slate. And
Absolutely.
and
What
yeah,
about live sand? 'Cause you can still get live sand, and it's live because there's a bacteria in there. Do you think that has a benefit? I know sand does, because obviously it's a surface area that bacteria can grow on. Do you think there's any advantage to having live sand, or what I deem as live sand?
there can be. The issue is that not all live sand is equal. And as live sand sits in a bag, I mean, I've had people email or talk to me at shows where, I cut the bag open and that live sand stunk. It was terrible, hydrogen sulfide, and I put it in my tank and everything went south. Well, yeah, because hydrogen sulfide is toxic to everything,
Mm.
because the bacteria in there, heterotrophic bacteria, these are not nitrifiers, but heterotrophic bacteria, the same cell can work three different ways. If there's lots of oxygen, it'll degrade organics and it'll produce ammonia, and that goes into the nitrogen cycle. If there's a little bit of oxygen where the system's anaerobic, so think the live sand's been sitting in a bag, it's been there for a few months, now it's got low oxygen. Well, that anaerobic condition, the heterotrophs will actually consume the nitrate, and that's okay. But when it goes anaerobic, completely free of oxygen, the sand will turn black. And at that point, it's consuming it, there's no oxygen and it's producing hydrogen sulfide, and you don't want to put that in your aquarium. So it depends upon the age.
Sure.
What I tell people is, if you're going to use live sand, put it in. It's going to get stirred up just naturally with your water, your hands, putting everything in there. Fill the tank up and run the tank for about 48 hours before you do anything, because you may get a bacterial bloom as the bacteria in the sand are now oxygenated and stirred up. So you've got to wait for a few days. And you may see a lot of ammonia in the water, because some of the manufacturers add organics to that live sand, which the bacteria are going to feed on and reduce to ammonia.
Okay, so let it settle, and it takes sometimes a couple of days for it to clear anyway. So just by letting
Right.
it clear, let it settle, and then what? Test for ammonia, because then if you've got an
And
ammonia source, I'm assuming you could argue you've started the cycle.
right. And a lot of people, I don't know how popular the fishless cycling is in the UK, but it's very popular here.
It is. You get a mix of people that will have use Dr. Tim's, or they'll use some of the other brands that are on there. So it's becoming more and more popular. And if people ask questions about cycling a tank, people will say use an ATM, a colony, and then you can put your fish in and you follow that. So it's become more and more popular. I think it outweighs those people that would do the traditional maybe 4 weeks, you dose ammonia or a prawn or that kind of thing which you're referring to.
Yeah.
So definitely fishless, we say, is far more popular than it used to be.
Right. So with that, even before you put fish in, because you don't want to put them in a tank full of ammonia, definitely if the water's gone cloudy, that's a big sign that their heterotrophic bacteria are degrading organics, and they degrade it into ammonia. So you should definitely test ammonia before you add ammonia drops, because the key, and that was one of the discoveries that I made, was everybody used to think there's just two nitrifying bacteria. There's the ammonia, nitrous ammonium chiropia, that takes ammonia to nitrite, and then there was Nitrobacter winogradsky, and it took the nitrite to nitrate, and it didn't matter whether it was freshwater, brackish, saltwater. whether it was low salinity or that high salinity, cold, warm, high ammonia or low ammonia. It was just those, and that's not true at all. There's a wide diversity of nitrifying organisms, and the ones that we want in aquariums do not function when the ammonia is high. And high, I mean just like 10 milligrams, 10 parts per million. It switches
Wow.
over. So
Yeah.
the key to cycling is to keep the ammonia low, which is hard for our brains, because in the cycling process, the ammonia bacteria grow faster than the nitrite bacteria. And so, especially in seawater, and that's because as you increase the salinity, the cell has to take energy just to maintain itself so it doesn't explode because of
Yeah.
the salinity difference. And the nitrite, converting nitrite to nitrate yields very little energy. If you have to put most of that in maintaining the cell divides very slowly. So what that means is that as you're cycling, the ammonia will disappear first, but the nitrite will increase.
Mm-hmm.
And the typical reaction is, oh, my ammonia bacteria are going to starve, so I have to feed them every day. And that means the nitrite goes higher and higher. Well, nitrite is actually poisonous to these bacteria. If it gets too high, it slows down the cell and you get stuck. And that's why a lot of people will say, I've had this high nitrite for 3 weeks, my tank won't cycle. Yeah, you're stuck. You do a big water change to get that nitrite down, and then the tank will cycle. But if it gets too high, the bacteria stall, and it gets too high because people are adding the ammonia every day. Your bacteria are not going to starve. They're not human. They don't need to eat every day, 3 times a day. So you can go a couple of days, you can go a week without adding ammonia and let the nitrite bacteria population catch up so that it's cycling quicker.
So that's why you get the lag, where you get that initial ammonia spike. As that comes down, the nitrite then picks up because there's a lag in that, what you're just saying earlier on. So that's why you see, if you have a chart, one will go up as that comes down or tops out, should we say. The other one starts to build up. And then what you don't want to do is then add additional ammonia, because then you're going in an ever decreasing circle, aren't you? Is what you're saying, that you can't get past that stage because you're fueling it. So you're going around those 2 steps, I suppose, aren't you? Is what you're saying.
Yeah. Like you said earlier, the average is it takes about 4 weeks to cycle an aquarium. But in most aquariums, the ammonia disappears in 8 or 10 days. Well, what's happening with the other 20 some days? It's the nitrite, because they just grow so much slower. So what I preach all the time and talk about is keep your ammonia low, resist adding too much so your nitrite doesn't go way up. Because if your nitrite goes deep purple off the scale, your system's going to stall.
Yeah.
And if that happens,
so
go ahead.
I was going to say, when you say K low, I know I'm thinking, okay, low. What in terms of measurement, what kind of level are you trying to keep it under? Because I'm sure there'll be people watching this thinking, okay, you say low. It's a bit like flow, high, medium, and low. What does that mean?
Right.
In ammonia, what kind of level are you saying? Well, actually, you don't really want it to get above X. So if you're testing it every day, what kind of level are we talking at?
You don't want either the ammonia or nitrite to get above 5. Keeping it at about 2 or low. And a lot of people misread this, is they add ammonia until they get a reading. We tell people no, 4 drops per gallon, but don't let the ammonia get up, or nitrite get above 5. And we have cycled huge, 500,000 liter public aquariums in 12 days using dosing pumps. Because if most people, they go and they add the ammonia once, so it shoots up really high. Now the bacteria, you've got a low population and they've got to work on that. But if you dose just a little bit, continually dose a little bit, the bacteria can keep care of that because there's a small population of bacteria. There's a little bit of ammonia. They can handle it. And you can dose 24 hours a day and build that population up. But most people don't have dosing systems like that. There's a science to doing the cycling fast. It can be done.
Yeah, I must admit, I never heard. I've always people say, right, you dose X and you do it in one go, and that's it, as
Yeah,
opposed to drip feed, which kind of makes sense. We drip feed other things, don't we? When we're dosing the key elements of alkalinity, you learn over time not to dose it in one go. You dose it, one, that's because of stability, but I suppose you just got that
yeah,
constant food, I suppose, or constant element that you're
yeah,
feeding into whatever needs to as a take up of that. And in this case, it's the bacteria, isn't it?
yeah. And as long as you can maintain alkalinity and pH, the bacteria will work fine. Which you have a pretty big buffer with saltwater aquariums. Freshwater aquariums, some places don't. They have very little buffering ability, and so the pH drops. And why the pH drops is as ammonia is converted to nitrite and nitrite's converted to nitrate, an acid hydrogen ions are produced, and pH is basically the concentration of hydrogen. So the nitrogen cycle produces hydrogen, which is going to consume alkalinity, which is going to drop the pH. That's why all aquariums their pH tends to drop, because the conversion of ammonia and nitrite is producing hydrogen.
Ah, right. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Just before we move on, there's a couple of things I've heard is around if you increase the temperature and you reduce your salinity, that helps to cycle the tank and get your bacteria growing. And you touched upon it earlier on around the salt water, and they're trying to maintain themselves and to grow. So I kind of get why if you keep your salinity lower, that helps them because they're not having to feed themselves and keep themselves maintained because they're being bombarded with salt water. So what kind of level of salinity, if you're saying, right, okay, you cycle your tank, bring your salinity down to X, and then you can take it back up after a few days, what kind of level there? And then how does temperature help us as well?
Well, first, temperature. Bacteria, the nitrifiers love warm temperatures, especially the nitrite. So somewhere between 27 and 30 degrees Celsius. I deal with Celsius all the time. That's much easier than
No,
Fahrenheit.
that's right.
So,
I think at 25 degrees, that's what I keep my tank at, rock solid regardless. But yeah, so you're taking out quite a bit to what we are used to in a saltwater aquarium.
yeah, for the bacteria, we grow the bacteria at 30 Celsius. They like
Okay.
it nice and warm, and they just will reproduce faster. And then for salinity, yes, drop the salinity down to about 20 parts per thousand. In the hydrometer reading, one point,
What was that,
I think that's
1.020
one
or?
point, one, no, 1 point, I think it's like more 1.16 or 1.18.
Okay.
But
Okay. So that's
um,
dropping
but
again from the usual level.
oh,
Yeah. Okay. That makes
oh
sense.
yeah, definitely almost a third to a half. But and I showed this years ago, but in a recent study from a group in Germany was showing it's quite interesting because I touched upon it earlier. People think all the nitrifiers are the same. But what they showed, and again, I showed this too, if you grow freshwater system, you're going to grow a certain group of nitrifiers. In the marine system, you're going to grow a different group of nitrifiers. They are not the same species. And what's weird and not predicted is that the theory is that the saltwater bacteria can't tolerate the fresh water, and the freshwater bacteria can't, because that's why people say dip your fish or dip your corals or dips to get rid of the bacteria, because you're dipping them in a fresh water just for a little bit. But the actual results are completely different. The saltwater bacteria have a huge range. They can go down to basically freshwater, but
Oh,
the freshwater bacteria, once you get to about 8 to 10 parts, so just at the edge of brackish,
Mm.
they die off. So the freshwater have a very long range, so they can tolerate going down to 20 parts per thousand without a problem. And then once the system is cycled, and like you said, at that lower salinity, more energy can go into cell division rather than cell maintenance. And so they
Yeah.
can divide faster and you can build a bigger population. And what I
Cool.
tell people is if you're going out there in California, people, and people want to keep cold water corals, fine. Set the bacteria up first in the system using warm water and then drop the temperature no more than 5 degrees Celsius per day down to your target back temperature. But you grow a
Yeah.
huge number of bacteria or nitrifiers, and then each one, as the temperature decreases, is working slower and slower, but you have a huge number. The opposite way, you start with a couple of bacteria, this is relative, in cold
Yeah.
water, and it takes them forever to divide. So you're waiting, like cement dry. It takes months and months to get anything to work. So you go from
Because of
high
lack
to
of
low
lack
temp.
of heat. Yeah. And you end up
Yeah,
at a better place rather than kind of going like that way. Okay, cool.
yeah.
Before we move on, is there anything else around cycling in the tank that we haven't covered and you think, well, actually, this is what you should do, or these are the things that you should consider? Because I think we've covered a lot of things about ammonia, nitrate, salinity, temperature, which is kind of core to what we're doing.
Yeah. One thing I say is don't add organics so fast. Cut shrimp, any of the fuels, the sugars. That's going to promote the heterotrophs, which will out compete the nitrifiers. For the first week or so, make it an ammonia environment, and then start introducing your organics, but not at the very beginning. Yeah.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. Well, that's a wrap on part one, but join us for part two, where Dr. Timms talks about how do you manage a tank beyond cycle.